Hi everybody, welcome to Main Street Homestead. I said two like I forgot what I was going to say.
Start over. Clap, clap.
Welcome back to Main Street Homestead and happy almost St. Patty's Day. St. Patty's Day is coming up, so I am going to be making corned beef for the very first time. So full disclosure, I have never corned beef before ever, so I did a lot of research. We talked about corning beef last year because we do butcher our own beef, so we have plenty of beef. This year when I was shopping in the store for corned beef, because we almost always have corned beef on St. Patrick's Day, one, I was shocked at the cost of the corned beef, and two, the last couple that we've got the last several years honestly have not been that good. You know, there's a lot of chemicals, a lot of stuff in the corned beef that's not very good for you. So this year we are going to corn brisket ourselves. So bear with me because I have never done this process before, not even a demo run. This is the real deal, live learning on the curve. So research, I did learn that there is two main ways that you can corn a beef. And actually you can corn any type of meat. It does not have to be beef, which I thought was very interesting. I read that goat is very good. So if I ever have goats, I might have corned goat. But the two main methods to corn meat is either wet or dry method. The wet method is the one that we're most familiar with, I would say, in America, because that's what you typically buy in the grocery store. It is in its package, in its own brine. Then the dry method is where you prepare the salt mixture, rub it down, and the salt pulls the moisture out of the meat so it creates its own brine instead of adding water and brine on top of it. So I said that wrong the last time. So I do have one of our beef briskets from our Dexter beef that I'm going to set behind me because we're not going to need it initially because we're going to have to prepare the brine first. To do the brine, you need to have a non-reactive pot because you are going to be dissolving a lot of salt in water. So you want to use one that's enameled, that is not aluminum, not a reactive metal. So I have my lovely enamel pot here that I use to make hot sauce with a lot of vinegar. So I'm going to put in here 1 quart of water. Now, our water, our city is very small. We do have our own municipal city water that is chlorinated. Probably not as chlorinated as some city waters are, but it still does have a little bit in it. So what I did was I filled up a pitcher last night with 2 quarts of water because that's what you're going to need for the total recipe, and I let it sit out overnight so the chlorine could evaporate off of it like if you're putting it in your fish aquarium. I do that whenever I'm going to be fermenting or brining anything because I don't want the chlorine in the water to inhibit the beneficial bacteria growth. So when I was researching corned beef recipes, there's a lot of variations out there, of course. So I'm going to go through some of the basic ingredients. When I was doing research on the process and looking at lots of different recipes, I really wasn't happy with any one recipe. So I kind of morphed the parts that I liked out of several different recipes into one recipe. So we're going to use now. So the main ingredients are going to be your water, and you're going to do 1 cup of salt. Now it is important what kind of salt you use. You do not want to use standard table salt that has iodine in it or any type of caking agents. You want to use a natural salt. Sea salt is probably going to be most common. However, sea salt if you buy sea salt from, off the shelf at the store, some sea salts do still have caking agents and stuff in them, so you definitely want to read the label and be careful what you're purchasing. This salt that I have is a natural ancient sea salt with the trace minerals. It doesn't have any caking agents, no iodine, no additives, nothing added into it, so it works good. So I've got my 1 quart of water, 1 cup of salt. Next is going to be a 1/2 cup of sugar. I looked at recipes, this is one thing that was variable. Some recipes did, some recipes didn't. I decided 1 cup of brown sugar. How can you go wrong? So half a cup of brown sugar. So next is going to be your spice blend, which if you've ever bought a corned beef at the store, this is what comes in the little packet. So looking through a lot of the different recipes, it calls for a blend of mustard seed, allspice, coriander, cloves, bay leaves. I have all of that stuff individually in my kitchen. However, I also had a jar of pickling spice that has been hanging around for a while, so I decided to use it up. So based on the recipes that I previewed and combining the ingredients that I wanted from those recipes, I kind of guesstimated the amount of each one of those spices, added it all together, and went, yeah, that looks about good. So I'm going to put that in there. So that's going to have my mustard seed, coriander, cloves, bay leaves, and some peppercorns. Looking at a lot of the recipes though, the ratio of peppercorns in the recipes compared to the ratio of peppercorns that was in the pickling spice was not quite enough. So I'm going to add an additional tablespoon of peppercorns. The recipes also called for, some of them called for cinnamon sticks. So I basically kind of took all the recipes that I looked at and added everything together. With the exception of juniper berries. I do not have juniper berries on hand, so we're not using juniper berries. So I'm putting 2 cinnamon sticks in here broken up. It also called for ginger, a half a teaspoon of ground ginger. I'm going to get that in there. Get this stuff out of my way. Garlic. This is one thing where the recipes varied a lot based on, I think, just personal preference and, regional. Certain regions use a lot more garlic than other regions. So I saw anywhere from 2 to like 6 cloves of garlic. So I'm going on the higher end because we love garlic. You will see that my garlic is not peeled. I actually had a bunch of garlic that was left over from my seed garlic that I saved from the garden last year. I then break those heads up, save the larger cloves to replant in the garden in the fall, which I did in October. So they're out in the garden growing at this moment. But you only want to replant the large cloves, so you end up with a lot of these little teeny weeny cloves left that are a major hassle to peel and cook with. I do use them for that, but I thought for this recipe, it's going in a brine, and then it's going to be pretty much discarded anyway. I'm not going to waste my time peeling this. So I took the remainder of my mini cloves of garlic that was left from last growing season. I took the flat side of a knife, smashed them very well. Some of the larger ones I cut in half. So I'm going to put these in here, peel and all. And then it's still going to infuse that garlic flavor into my brine. The last thing the recipes called for was thyme. So I am out of dried thyme. I just ran out to the garden, and the thyme that I have that's in a little bit of a sheltered location is still alive for the winter. So I'm putting some fresh, I just grabbed a handful, whacked it off with the scissors, and put it in the pot. So now that I have all of that stuff in here, you're going to put this on the stove, which I'm going to do in a minute, and then we're going to come back when it's completely cooled, add the second quart of water, and then submerge our beef in it. So that will be part 2. So just wanted to talk a minute about pink salt. So when I was doing research, I had never heard of pink salt before. I had never used it. And when I say pink salt, which I now know what it is, I'm not referring to Himalayan pink salt. This is pink salt. It's called pink salt because it's artificially dyed pink so that you know what it is because it contains the nitrates. So a lot of recipes that I looked at called for the nitrite salt in the recipe, which would be similar to what you buy at the grocery store. The whole point of doing this at home is to not have those extra chemicals in my finished product, so I am not using that. So I just wanted to clarify, and like I said, I just learned about it, so it was news to me, but I am not using that pink salt. The salt that I put in here is pink, but it's because it's a naturally mined sea salt. So we're going to put this on the stove. We're going to heat it up just enough to get the sugar and the salt dissolved well. It does not have to come to a boil. It does not have to cook for any certain amount of time. You just want to make sure that everything is fully dissolved into the brine, and then it's going to be ready to submerge our piece of meat. Okay, so I got my brine cooked over a medium heat, and I wouldn't say really cooked, just warmed up enough so that the sugar and the salt completely dissolved. I now have it cooling in my garage because our attached garage this time of year is like a giant walk-in cooler pretty much. It's not as cold as a refrigerator, but it's a few degrees above that. So we use it kind of as storage for things that don't have to be refrigerator cold. So I have it sitting out there to finish cooling off. You have to have that brine completely cooled off before you put it on your meat, because otherwise it will cook the meat and you do not want that. So it needs to be completely cool. So I'm gonna take the lid off of my crock here. Now when you use a container to brine your meat in, some people will use plastic bags. That works good because you want to make sure that your meat is completely submerged into the brine. I am going to use this stoneware pot because it's glazed and it's non-reactive, because your meat is going to be sitting in here for days. And then you want to weight it to make sure that it stays completely submerged underneath your brining liquid. I'm not going to use plastic because at some point plastic bags start to break down, even if they're food grade. With something in there as caustic as a high salt brine, that's a possibility. I also don't want to take the risk of it leaking. You'd have to put it in another container, or yada, yada, yada. So let's take a look at our meat. This is our home butchered, well, I shouldn't say home butchered. We don't butcher it. We have a locker butchered at this point in time. But it is the beef that we finished raising and then had butchered. So this is a brisket from one of our Irish Dexters, which is a heritage breed cattle. They're a smaller breed cow. They are similar to a Highland, which everybody knows what those are now because they're so cute and they're the trendy in thing. Only they're not shaggy like a Highland. They have shorter hair, but their body size and type is pretty much the same. The horns are the same. They're just not shaggy, and they're either black or a reddish color like the Highlands are. So here we have a brisket. And there is not much fat on here at all. If your piece of meat has a lot of fat on it, you're going to need to potentially trim up some of that fat. Actually, what have they got here? They have butcher paper in the middle. So, yeah, it's a lot bigger brisket than I thought when I opened it up. I thought it was going to be a smaller, thicker cut, but it's actually a larger, thinner cut. So this is not going to take nearly as long to brine. Jay's getting excited about eating corned beef in the background.
I'm not going to share it either.
This is not going to take as long to brine because it's not very thick. When we got this package out of the freezer and I saw it was that thick, I didn't realize it was folded up in the packaging. So the reason that you want to soak your meat in the brine is because for days is you want to allow enough time for the brine to completely penetrate to the center of the meat. If it's not in there long enough, when you cut this open down the thickest part in the center, there's going to be a section in the middle where the brine has not penetrated enough. So time is a critical element. And in my research, I saw a lot of different variables on the time factor. So how long it needs to stay in the brine depends on, one, the size of your cut of meat, and two, the temperature at which you're brining it in. So you can brine this at room temperature and it's going to brine faster. Most people brine it in their refrigerator because they feel safer about it, so it's going to be slower. I was going to put ours in our garage because it's somewhere right in the middle, and so it's going to be cooler but not refrigerator cold, and it's going to be out of our way and not in the kitchen because I do not have a lot of excess counter space in my small galley kitchen. So I would say, oh gosh, because I've never done this before, I don't know how long, but the time frames that I looked at in my research were 5 to 7 days at room temp, but that was for a normal beef size brisket, you know, that's going to have a lot of thickness to it, or 10 up to 12 days in a refrigerator. So I'm going to say even in our cool garage, I don't know, we're just going to have to check this. Today is the 11th. Today's the 11th, and so St. Patrick's Day is on the 17th. So it's probably going to be right about there. We're probably going to be right about in the mark. If this had been thicker, I was actually thinking that we might not be able to eat it until Sunday. St. Patrick's Day is on Friday, so Sunday the 19th. But this is going to go pretty quickly, I believe. Let's cut this in 2 pieces. So I'm going to need a cutting board, but now my hands are all bloody, so I'm going to have to wash my hands and get a cutting board out and a knife to cut this into 2 pieces because I was not planning on having to have a piece of meat that I cut. I was planning on it being this size of a brisket and double thickness. So we'll edit that out while I wash my hands. Okay, I'm back. My hands are washed so that I can actually get a knife out and a cutting board out. So I'm going to set my pot aside and let's go ahead and just cut this in half. It'll be easier to cook and it will brine faster. And okay, in cutting this, a brisket has a grain that runs 2 different ways. So technically, I should cut this with the grain and be proper, separate those 2 pieces, but I'm not. I'm just going to butcher it. Because it's going to be corned and then cooked all day, slow cooker anyway. So you can see the 2 different pieces of the muscle. One runs one way and one runs another on a brisket. So there we have it. So as soon as our brine is cooled enough to get this in the pot and submerged in the brine, we will get that going. So until then, we're just going to keep an eye on our brine and give it some time to cool and probably go enjoy a refreshment. So total ingredients in the brine are 1 quart of water, 1 tablespoon of mustard seeds, 1 teaspoon of allspice, 1 teaspoon of coriander, 1/2 teaspoon of cloves, 3 or 4 bay leaves, 2 tablespoons of peppercorns, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, 2 cinnamon sticks. One thing that I forgot earlier is I'm going to add a dried chili from my garden because I add dried chili to just about everything. 2 to 6 cloves of garlic, 1 cup of salt, and 1/2 cup of brown sugar. So our brine has been completely incorporated. The salt's dissolved, the sugar's dissolved. Tastes pretty good because I stuck my finger in it earlier and licked it and it tastes delicious. But I'm going to put a little bit of brine in the bottom of my pot because I want the meat to have some of the brine underneath it. If I was to put the meat in here and then just pour the brine on top, the meat would actually seal to the bottom of the pot and the bottom part would not get exposed. So here's my brisket, which is 4 to 5 pounds of meat. I'm going to put this in here and put the rest of my brine on top. everything out of there. I actually have the remainder of the second quart of water, so you end up with 2 quarts total. It just wouldn't all fit in my pot when I set it out in the garage to cool. I'm trying to get all the tids and bits out of there. There we go. Okay, to keep it submerged, you can put a plate on top of it with something weighted. I may have to change this up, but I'm gonna try this as just like another Corningware lid because it's heavier than my dinner plates. That looks like it's gonna work. As long as I get it tucked around there. There we go. So I'm gonna have to get something heavier to set on here, which would just be like maybe one of my other measuring cups filled up with water, or a jar filled up with water. Then I'm gonna put the lid on it and I'm going to set it in my garage, which is basically like a cool room. And I'm gonna leave it for 5 to 7 days. When we come back after 5 to 7 days, we are going to cook the corned beef. Thanks for watching.
Smells good.
Do I need to say anything else, honey? It tastes good. I licked my finger.